Something we're going to see time and again are games that have radically different receptions between Japan and the rest of the world. Sometimes that's because the game was radically reworked when localizing it. In the case of Houma ga Koku, when it was released in the US, 2 of the levels were stripped out, and to compensate for that, 2 of the other levels were repeated. But on those repeated levels, they still used the enemy placement for the originals, resulting in broken spawns for them. And while the NES Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde is known as one of the worst games on the system, in Japan, Pomoga ga Koku is known as one of the absolute worst games on the Famicom. So I guess having more of it wasn't really an improvement. The Japanese title means something like Time of Wickedness. If the US title didn't give you a clue, this game is based on Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde. I'll spare you the literary analysis and just say that the game doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the story. In this game, Dr. Jekyll's on his way to get married. But due to his experimentation on himself, if he gets too stressed out, he turns into Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde relieves stress by beating up people. So if he beats up enough people, then he turns back into Dr. Jekyll. There are 6 stages in which Dr. Jekyll has to dodge the annoyances of everyday life in 19th century London. They're basically variations on streets and parks. And in all of those stages, Dr. Jekyll just has to go from left to right. I'm going to get the nice things about Houma ga Koku out of the way. It's a good-looking game, and the music's pretty good. I even think the premise behind the mechanics aren't bad. A game where you're trying to keep Dr. Jekyll's frustrations down as long as possible, and then have to burn out Mr. Hyde's rage before it gets out of control. There's a lot you can do with that. Unfortunately, the way it was implemented here is pretty much the worst way they could do it. Let's start with Dr. Jekyll. The way that he walks is painfully slow. I wouldn't even say that he's walking, he's more sauntering. That slow movement makes it very difficult for him to avoid things, especially when things are getting thrown around that emerge randomly from people. There's no pattern to learn, you just have to go for it and hope you get into a gap. The same thing is true for the spiders that bob up and down randomly, and the bees that just spin around. Dr. Jekyll can stick out his cane to attack, but the only thing that's affected by it are bees. Then there's the jumping. Dr. Jekyll has a bit of a delay in his jump, and that becomes a real problem when you require split-second timing to get over some things. You can also press up to enter some doors. That can let you avoid some attacks, but you could also get kicked out of those doors. Getting hit by anything sends Dr. Jekyll flying to the left, and the effect of being hit is hugely variable. It could do nothing, it could cause stress, or it could physically harm you. And the amount of damage it does is variable. Everything in Houma ga Koku is frustratingly indeterminate. The absolute worst thing when playing as Dr. Jekyll are the bombers. These pink guys will drop a bomb at your feet when you walk past, and Dr. Jekyll moves so slowly that if you go to the right, you'll probably still get hit. Except, the length of the fuse varies by stage, so on some stages you can keep going to the right. What you have to do instead is back off as soon as they drop it, and that will usually let you get clear of the explosion, which has a damage radius of about half the screen despite the small graphic. When a bomber shows up, other characters on the screen will start running in terror, and then they'll do damage to you. And the absolute worst thing about the bombers is that they have a bad tendency to show up one right after the other. Dodge one bomb, and here comes the next one walking in, so you can't make any progress. If there's an obstacle with random movement at the center of the screen, you won't be able to do anything until the bombers stop coming. So you've taken enough damage to become Mr. Hyde. Now you go to the demon world, the dark, twisted reflection of what Dr. Jekyll was walking through. And in this case I mean reflection literally, since you start on the right-hand side and go to the left. If Hyde reaches the point in the demon world that Dr. Jekyll reached in the normal one, you're killed by a bolt of lightning out of the blue. There's no signifier of the spot that will kill you. It just happens. So that means you have to have a bit of a runway before you turn into Mr. Hyde. If there aren't enough monsters to kill before Hyde reaches Jekyll's spot, then there's no way that you can recover. Hyde can punch, but what you really need to do are throw fireballs, which you do by pressing up and B. The fireballs travel in a downward path, and then curve back up and zigzag to you. You can also only have one of them on the screen at a time. And since it can take a long time before they go away, you have to pick your shots carefully. The tougher monsters in the demon world will leave coins behind. These can be used by Dr. Jekyll in a very small handful of spots to recover life, or get one particular obstacle out of the way. The real way that you need to recover life is turn into Hyde, and then beat up enough monsters to turn back to Jekyll. That restores your life bar to full. You also come back with no obstacles on the screen, so for some of the most dangerous things in the game, turning into Hyde and then back to Jekyll is the most efficient way of getting past. Houma ga Koku really is one of the worst games out there. A lot of the times it'll feel like you're getting hit and there's nothing you could have done about it. And the way that Hyde dies when he catches up with Dr. Jekyll isn't really communicated, so you'll just die and have no idea what's going on. On the positive side, there are infinite continues in this game. There's also a way to skip levels, though the code is a little bit complicated. When I put in the cartridge, I was thinking, I hope I can at least make it to level 2. And in fact, I made it all the way to level 3 on my own. But that's because I've tried challenging myself to beating this game a few times over the years. And that's really the only reason someone should play Houma ga Koku. A personal challenge to suffer through one of the most annoying games ever.